Luc Anh Ky regained consciousness slowly, her senses returning in a blurred haze. The first thing she saw was a wall of pristine, blinding white, and her nostrils were immediately invaded by the sharp, cloying scent of antiseptic and surgical disinfectant. A heavy weight pressed against her hand, someone was clutching it tightly. She turned her head with effort and saw that it was Tan Cam, her face etched with exhaustion. Nearby, Thi Thi stood motionless before the hospital room window, her silhouette framed against the gray sky, her eyes filled with a profound, hollow sadness as she stared into the distance. The moment Luc Anh Ky's eyes flickered open, Tan Cam leaned in, her voice trembling with concern as she asked, "Anh Ky, you're finally awake? Are you okay? Do you want some water?" Luc Anh Ky's voice was nothing more than a dry, ragged whisper as she spoke the words that had been haunting her subconscious. It really was Lam Ky. She's truly dead, isn't she? Tan Cam's eyes welled up with fresh tears that threatened to spill over. Duong Thi Thi turned away from the window and rushed to the bedside, wrapping her arms around Anh Ky in a tight, suffocating embrace to offer whatever comfort she had left. "Don't think too much about it now," Thi Thi sobbed. "It was just a horrible accident. Please, just try to rest." "But who did it?" Anh Ky's voice grew sharper, fueled by a sudden spike of adrenaline. "Who killed Lam Ky?" "No one killed her," Tan Cam replied, her voice dropping to a low, chilling tone. "The police say she committed suicide." "How could Lam Ky have committed suicide?" Anh Ky protested, her mind racing back to the night's events. "When we were at the bar earlier, she seemed so normal, so full of life. How could she go from that to ending her own life in the blink of an eye?" Suddenly, a deep, warm male voice resonated near her ear, breaking through the grief-stricken atmosphere of the room. "That is exactly what we are trying to determine. Now that you are awake, would you mind if I asked you a few questions?" Anh Ky looked up and recognized the man immediately. He was the police officer who had first broken the news of Lam Ky's gruesome death to them. He stepped forward, his presence commanding yet strangely calming. "I am Luc Tu Min," he introduced himself, deputy head of the Serious Crimes Unit. "I am hoping you will cooperate with us so we can get to the bottom of this case." Anh Ky nodded weakly, her strength failing her. After Luc Tu Min had finished taking his notes and recording their statements, he made his way out of the hospital wing. Before he could reach the exit, a girl came running after him. He turned to see Tan Cam, the girl with the strikingly large, bright eyes who had practically crashed into him back at the hotel. Today, she looked fragile, dressed in a long, flowing pale pink dress with her dark hair cascading over her shoulders. Traces of dried tears still stained her cheeks like scars. "I want to see Lam Ky one last time," she pleaded, her voice small. "Can you arrange that for me? Please?" Luc Tu Min looked into those wide, desperate eyes and found himself unable to say no. Although he was nearly 30 and had been pursued by countless women throughout his career, there was something uniquely magnetic about this girl that forced him to pay attention. He gave a solemn nod. The air outside was biting and cold. The shock of her best friend's violent end had left Tan Cam in a state of catatonic depression, her head bowed as they walked. Luc Tu Min, sensing the suffocating weight of the silence, decided to try and break the tension. As they stepped into the elevator to head down to the morgue, he began to tell her a story, hoping to distract her. "I heard a story once," he began, his voice echoing in the small metal box of the elevator. "There was a doctor and a nurse working the graveyard shift together. They were taking the elevator down when it stopped halfway. The doors opened, and someone was standing there, waiting to get on. But the doctor slammed the close button immediately, preventing the person from entering. The nurse was confused and asked why he was being so rude. The doctor turned to her, pale as a ghost, and whispered, 'Didn't you see? There was a red string tied around that person's wrist.' In this hospital, every corpse in the morgue has a red string tied to their wrist just like that." Upon hearing this, the nurse slowly lifted her arm toward the doctor and asked, "A string just like this one?"
Tan Cam listened in total silence.
Then, with a sudden, jerky movement, she raised her own hand and thrust her wrist toward his face. "A string just like this one?" she asked.
Luc Tumin's heart skipped a beat.
There, wrapped around her pale, porcelain skin, was a vivid, blood-red string. He recoiled instinctively, his back hitting the cold metal wall of the elevator. Tan Cam let out a soft, melodic laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've worn this since I was a little girl," she explained softly.
"My parents gave it to me to ward off evil spirits." Luc Tumin realized he had tried to tell a ghost story only to be terrified by the very person he was trying to comfort.
Yet, despite the scare, he felt a strange sense of relief because he had finally managed to make her smile. However, that smile vanished instantly the moment the elevator doors groaned open to reveal the cold, sterile hallway leading to the morgue. Tan Cam was a woman of considerable courage, but when the sheet was pulled back to reveal the remains of Lam Kai, her strength evaporated. Her legs turned to jelly, and she collapsed into Luc Tumin's arms, her body shaking with violent tremors. As her eyes fell upon the area where Lam Kai's chest should have been, she saw the horrific mutilation. She pointed a trembling finger at the patches of missing skin and let out a blood-curdling scream.
"The camisole!
It's the red camisole!" She was right. The missing skin on the corpse's torso formed the perfect, haunting silhouette of an ancient red camisole, a yemdu. The actual garment that Lam Kai had been wearing had been removed by the medical examiners and placed at the bottom of a glass jar used for preserving ocular specimens. That jar sat nearby on the autopsy table, a grotesque centerpiece. Inside the fluid, fine threads of blood-red silk undulated like ghostly hair, while 4 severed eyeballs bobbed and drifted in the liquid. Occasionally, the eyes would collide with one another, spinning slowly as if they were whispering or laughing at an invisible joke.
Could Lam Kai really have been so cruel to herself?
Tan Cam whispered, her voice cracking. "The evidence suggests so," 2 men replied grimly.
Tan Cam tried to reconcile this image with the friend she knew.
Lam Kai had always been vibrant, a girl who loved life and self-identified as a fashion queen.
How could that girl have transformed into this cold, mangled slab of meat? Was she insane? Did she lose her mind?
According to our forensic reconstruction, Luc Tumin explained, she was in the middle of taking a bath before the incident occurred. It appears she suffered a sudden, violent psychotic break, leading to the series of tragedies you see here. "I've known her for years," Tan Cam argued, her voice rising in desperation.
"I never once heard anything about her having mental health issues. She never showed a single sign of instability. Not one."
"That is precisely what is baffling us," the detective admitted. "We've checked all her medical records, and there is no history of psychiatric illness. Her family has a clean bill of health as well. There is no logical reason for her to suddenly descend into such a state of madness. Furthermore, she had no known enmity with the owner of the diamond shop.
In fact, our witnesses say they appeared very intimate when they entered the hotel. We are missing the crucial link, the motive that triggered this."
Tan Cam fell into a deep, brooding silence, her mind churning through memories. Suddenly, a thought struck her.
But why would she cut the skin off her own body like that?
"That is the question we were hoping you could answer," Luc Tumin said, his eyes searching hers. "We want to know why she was so obsessed with that specific shape. It's as if she wanted to become the garment itself."
Did she have a particular fascination with that red camisole?
"Of course she did," Tan Cam said, her eyes glazing over.
"Don't you see?
We were all obsessed with that fabric." She reached into her bag and pulled out a long, crimson scarf. She handed it to Luc Tumin. As he took the fabric, he felt a strange, hypnotic pull. The shade of red was unnaturally deep, possessing a malevolent beauty that made it almost impossible to look away. It felt warm, almost like living skin. "Me, Lam Kai, Thi Thi," And on Kai, every one of us has an item made from a piece of this cloth, Tan Kam explained, her voice thick with fresh tears. Lam Kai had only just finished making that red camisole and put it on when everything went wrong.
It breaks my heart to think about it.
As a tear fell from her cheek and landed on the red scarf, a strange, ethereal light seemed to flash within the fibers of the fabric, momentarily dazing her. She snatched the scarf back and, with a melancholic sigh, wrapped it tightly around her own neck. She remembered the scene clearly now, how Lam Kai had excitedly helped her tie this very scarf just before they went to the bar.
They had been so happy then.
But that happiness was a ghost now, a fleeting shadow that would never return. Before she could finish adjusting the scarf, the heavy silence of the morgue was shattered by the frantic voice of Duong Tt echoing from the hallway.
Tan Kam.
Come to on Kai's room, quickly. She's starting to talk out of her head, she's saying terrifying things.
Tan Kam turned to Luc Tu Min, her face pale.
Please, go with her.
Go check on Kentucky.
I want to stay here and sit with Lam Kai for just a few more minutes. Luc Tu Min nodded, grabbed TT's hand, and raced toward the stairs to get back to the patient wards above. The real reason Tan Kam wanted them to leave was because a horrifying realization had just struck her. As she looked at Lam Kai's cold, distorted face on the metal table, she realized it bore a terrifying resemblance to the woman she had encountered on the 13th floor earlier, the woman who shouldn't have been there.
Especially from a side profile, the likeness was undeniable. No wonder that spectral figure had felt so hauntingly familiar.
But at that harrowing moment, Lam Kai was already dead, a cold corpse meant to be resting in eternal silence.
How could she possibly appear inside the elevator? Furthermore, how was it even conceivable for her to gain access to the 13th floor, a cursed level that the elevator was no longer programmed to reach? Gathering every shred of her remaining courage, Tan Kam stepped into the oppressive, sterile silence of the morgue. Her breath hitched as she reached out, her fingers trembling violently, and slowly began to peel back the heavy white sheet covering Lam Kai's face. What met her gaze sent a jolt of pure ice through her veins. Two hollow, pitch-black eye sockets stared back from a pale, sunken face. Her heart began to thrash wildly against her ribs like a trapped bird, yet a morbid compulsion forced her to look longer, desperate to confirm if Lam Kai was truly the same woman she had encountered in the elevator. In that terrifying heartbeat, she suddenly saw Lam Kai's blue lips curl into a grotesque, savage smirk. Overwhelmed by primal horror, Tan Kam tried to stumble backward, but it was already too late. Lam Kai's dead hand shot out with unnatural speed, her grip tightening like a freezing iron vise around Tan Kam's wrist. Terror surged through her, her mind went completely blank, and her entire body turned deathly cold as the warmth of life seemed to drain away. Lam Kai sat up with a sickening creak of her joints, using her stiff, gnarled, and frozen hand to clamp down firmly over Tan Kam's mouth, stifling her screams into muffled whimpers. Then, in a voice like dry leaves skittering over a grave, she whispered slowly, "Welcome. You have finally come to play on the 13th floor too." The overwhelming, metallic stench of rotting blood and stagnant water emanating from her face invaded Tan Kam's nostrils, making her stomach churn with nausea. Tan Kam struggled with all her might to scream, her lungs burning for air, and as she scrambled backward in a blind, desperate panic, she suddenly collided with a solid figure. The person caught her, wrapping their arms around her in a protective and gentle embrace, and spoke softly into her ear, "It's okay now. Everything is fine. There is nothing to worry about. Don't be afraid." It turned out to be two men. He looked into her eyes with deep concern, his expression filled with silent questions, trying to understand what horrific sight had reduced her to such a state of absolute, trembling fear. Tan Kam found no words to explain the nightmare she had just witnessed, her voice was trapped in her throat. Instead, she simply grabbed his hand and pulled him along, desperate to go upstairs and find On Kai. Upon reaching On Kai's room, they found her huddled beneath a heavy pile of blankets, her head buried deep as if trying to hide from an invisible monster. She refused to come out, her entire body shaking with violent, uncontrollable tremors that rattled the bed frame.
Tankam reached out and gently pulled the edge of the blanket down, whispering in a soothing tone, "Kai, it's me, Tankam.
Please, don't be scared anymore. How are you feeling? What happened?"
Kai poked her head out from the covers, but the moment her eyes landed on Tankam, she let out a piercing, blood-curdling scream and threw herself forward. She clung to Tankam with a desperate, bone-crushing grip, sobbing hysterically, "I saw her.
I saw Lam Kai. It was really her. She's back."
Tankam held her tightly, stroking her hair in an attempt to soothe the frantic girl. "Don't be afraid anymore. Perhaps your eyes were just playing tricks on you in the shadows.
It was just a trick of the light." Thi stood nearby, letting out a heavy, worried sigh as she watched the scene.
"My cousin has never had to endure such a traumatic shock in her life. This entire ordeal is just too horrific for her to handle." Kai collapsed back into Tankam's arms, her voice trembling and weak as she described the nightmare. "It was Lam Kai, I know it was. She was sitting right there, perched atop a pile of thick, dark blood in the restroom. The traditional camisole she was wearing was drenched in crimson, dripping with fresh gore. And she had no eyes. Just empty, black holes where they should have been. I saw her with my own eyes. I swear, it was truly her." Thi rushed over to her side, her voice frantic and high-pitched. "Good heavens, wake up, my dear. Stop letting your mind wander into such dark places.
If anything happens to you, if you lose your mind, what am I supposed to do?"
Tankam continued to pat Kai's back gently, offering hollow comforts to drown out the silence. "Don't let your mind dwell on it. It was probably just a hallucination, a manifestation of your fear.
It wasn't real. You must try not to think about it anymore."
After they administered a sedative, Kai's brow remained furrowed in deep distress as she finally, quietly, drifted into a fitful and restless sleep, haunted by shadows only she could see.